As you wish. Transmitting data.
$100 for an airstrike? Well, that's a steal.
Coordinates received. Advised to stand clear.
Yeah. Escape from Paradise City by Media Mobsters Sirius Games. A real-time gangster something or other released to no fanfare in late 2007. I have barely heard anyone talk about this game, or Gangland, to which this is a sequel. There are a few videos of it up online. The multiplayer button makes the game crash. It didn't crash. What the fuck? Never mind. This doesn't make the game crash. So, after crashing every single time that I tried to make it work, now that I've written the script and I'm in editing, the multiplayer button works. So, it's a shame it uses GameSpy. And I doubt it had much in the way of marketing. Or money, period. After its release, Sirius kept their name until filing for bankruptcy in May 2008. I bring all this up because much like Gangland, there is a ton of repetition, albeit worse. I've had a disc copy of this game since shortly after release. Unlike Gangland, this isn't on good old games. I've been through several computers in the years I've owned it, but no matter what I've thrown Escape from Paradise City at, it has never worked. Over the last few years, every few months, I'd remember this game and take yet another fruitless crack at cracking it, and then it returns to nothing. Then in my Discord, user Skeletom, the same one who stepped in for Precursors, tells me he downloaded it to no difficulty. So after years and years of trying and failing, with one download, it just works. Mostly. So thank you, Skeletom. We owe this video to your discovery. And sometime in all of this, I even lost that disc copy. So I got another. It's mostly for the manual. No recipes in this book, sadly. Much like last time, this game wound up a long and mostly boring yet strangely fascinating journey, albeit one I found far less charming than Gangland, but not entirely lacking. So this will be an evaluation, a critique, and a playthrough mixer, digging deep into this game because no one else has, and who else would. If you want to play along, well, I'm not posting the download link, but I will say it is very easy to actually find once you know the download exists. So if you have roughly a dozen hours spare, you can come play along with this video. And just know, I am going to be mean to this game. I know from just looking at it and with the scant background details I've just supplied you, this game obviously did not have a smooth and easy production, but I am being honest in my evaluation, and honestly, there are so few genuine things here to actually like. But still, there's a fair bit to be amused by. If we want to escape from Paradise City, we have to go there first, so let's get started. This menu is meant to have a video, but instead we only get 2 frames. One as it's loading, another when it does. We have Porter, one of our heroes, chasing after us in the hopes of catching up. He never will, however, because I am playing Unpatched. So we're not only missing a video here, but a delightfully cheesy intro. And, well, every single cutscene in the game. I beat it not knowing there were cutscenes at all. I only discovered there were meant to be later. Oh, and a positive, most in-game dialogue, a majority of which was never-ending pedestrian chatter, that's gone. In my reality, they never talk. I attempted patching the game regardless of that, but then it went right back to not running at all, much like Porter. Luckily in that patched version, all the cutscenes exist as BIC files in a directory, so don't you worry. I'll just nab them and go back to the broken version that works. And there is another positive. Without the patch, a lot of people had no nose. It took me way too long to notice it, and at a glance it made me think everyone was wearing those gag glasses, so I've got the best of all worlds. Gameplay-wise, we're fine. The one patch for this game exists for video issues, so I'll take this shambling mess of a version.
I thought I was home free. With 10 mil in my pocket after that last hit, I was all set on spending the rest of my days on my cruiser in Miami, fishing and chasing skirt. Then came this NSA agent, Kovacs, giving me the choice to either finish my shift in the joint or work for them as an undercover agent. So there I was, back on the streets, with nothing to gain. but my freedom.
I'll be using the first 3 stages to introduce characters and concepts, and then throughout the rest of our visit I'll expand on them. You can't take in all of Paradise at once, you see. It's bad for you. If you remember Gangland, you'll remember Paradise City's claim to fame, that no matter how many gangsters Mario put down, new ones would always take their place, sometimes overnight. While the age of the Mafia has sadly ended, this truth has not. Yet, it seems someone has taken notice. NSA agent Walter Jeffrey Kovacs is that man, and he has a plan. He has coerced 2 criminals and 1 crooked cop into heading into the hive that is Paradise, in order to, and I quote, apprehend the leader of a criminal organization. Oh, just the one? We're gonna need more to work with than that, Walt. Anyhow, instead of one lone Mario, we have 3 heroes this time. The long-ranged Porter, the melee fighter Angel, and Boris. Well, he just explains himself. First up is Porter. The story is once again delivered by loading screen slides, but they are joined by cutscenes and, I'll be giving us both. Even if the information in one occasionally contradicts the other. There are no mid-mission slides this time. On their own, they tell an absurd bullshit chronicle of, I want to say intrigue, but well, we'll see. With gameplay, they do this over the course of 13 hours, and totals around 1,350 words in length. Granted, I still don't mind the slides as a way to deliver story. The mixture of concept art and in-game shots is tacky and often jarring, especially as many of these concept art characters don't exist. And this is already inaccurate besides, since Porter cannot use handguns, that's Boris's weapon class. But I'm ignoring the truly worrying thing here. The plot in these is peppered with gameplay hints, and they are slotted in with all the comfort of a brick up the backside, and the first one we get really characterizes Porter as a man who belongs here. The adrenaline junkie former thief with millions of dollars to his name thinks to himself, nice. Gives me an opportunity to practice my new leg shot skill. Always good when the protagonist is just as excited to kneecap people as I am. And from there, it opens with Porter arriving at the docks. Better known as the docks. So, let's start with a surprise. This is no RTS. Yeah, take that, Wikipedia. Welcome to Combat View. You see, it's actually a semi-single player styled, semi-RPG, okay, kinda RTS. You click and drag to turn around, engage in cooldown based combat, and while we're a shit-ass level 1, we'll die if we pick any fight but the one we're being pointed at for this tutorial. This was a surprise for me as well. I was not aware it wasn't actually a strategy game, and this caused a mental disconnect that it took a long time to wrap my head around. But for now, we'll just live with it. For whatever reason in Combat View, all non-diegetic sound, which is really just a generic short musical loop, well, that goes away. In Combat View, all you hear is the battlefield. Our characters have 3 trait families with 2 trees in each. Along with that, we have stats, inventories, weapons with level requirements, and there isn't a Tommy gun in sight. This is no Mafia strategy game, this is a crime RPG. Neither Strategy View or Combat View actually has a great advantage over the other. There are some minor ones. Combat View feels made to deal with the fact that many of the maps are too filled with cramped alleyways to accommodate Strategy View, and Strategy View kinda lets you deal with the rare distant threat a bit easier. Having just arrived in Crime City with the job to topple a crime empire, our first task is to shoot a couple of people to death in broad daylight. We're congratulated on our murders by Kovacs, whose name is now spelt differently. Now assured we can shoot people to death, he wants us to shoot the neighborhood boss to surrender, then have him go and take over the neighborhood for us. I'd say this is taking too long, but I did just shoot the bloke. So that's the basic loop of the game. We're more or less going to be following this set of actions multiple times per stage, over and over. I wouldn't worry too much though, it only gets longer and more repetitive as we go. Kovacs, satisfied we did it once, asks us to end this tutorial stage by repeating what we just did, sans his guidance. Before that, mind, we now have business. This DIY shop sells guns, since if you buy the weapon yourself, murder is a DIY affair. It also sells nanomeds. Man, Paradise City sure has changed. We really are far removed from the Munganos. I need a drink. And, well, we got those, at extortionate prices. Black Russians make you run 10% faster, and as someone who has been running drunk in the past, oh, I wouldn't say it's faster, but it's nicer than you'd think. Can't say I recognize the rest of these drinks and their myriad buffs, but, well, I'm not one for cocktails. But I will put it to the barkeep. I get the DIY guys slipping me guns and sci-fi bullshit on the sly, but you shouldn't only serve drinks to the guy running the neighborhood. It's a bad business model. I mean, unless it changes that often. I mean, it's no wonder there are people guarding briefcases of booze in back alleys all over the place. I mean, it's understandable if this is what it costs to get buffed and blottoed. Yeah, this is really an MMO town. This is a literal trash mob, and they are guarding the liquor. Okay, so we have a drink that makes your colleagues do more damage, drinks that make you more agile, but then there's Warrior's Oil. It boosts melee damage by 15%, but this isn't a drink. It's magic. Okay, I have to talk about modern day set RPGs. I have a bias for them, so Escape from Paradise City should be in my good books. Well, when I say RPG, I mean an RPG like Boiling Point, not this sort of control scheme and style. Watching two normal human beings shoot each other for tens of seconds, this looks goofy. Especially when one of them has to go for a jog afterwards. This scene is typical in fantasy and sci-fi settings, you know, two people just going at it for ages, but then my brain can accept this with far less issue. But, well, Fiddy ain't got shit on this guy. They also sell painkillers here, for the customer who ain't coming back. So yes, all the flavour of Gangland is gone. I think that's pretty clear by now. Escape from Paradise City has a more modern take on the city, but with nanomeds and weird accelerator shit we can stick on our guns, and magic alcohol. And yet it still all feels squeezed for anything characterful. I get no impression of this place beyond modern and slummish. And trust me, as we go on, this impression's only going to get worse. So I hire a big lad named Crowbar, and together we tackle the slightly sturdier neighborhood boss of the neighboring neighborhood. I gotta say, second time around, it was further from the neighborhood of fun. And after the takeover, when I've technically already won, I still have to wait for the boss to nip about and tell everyone who they answer to now. He basically has to sign off on my victory. If a neighborhood has no business, the boss will just scoot to the side of the room and this sends ownership to you. Mission accomplished. We then switch over to Angel Vargas, last name unimportant.
It wasn't easy getting food on the table every day. Mom was always drunk, and Dad, well, forget about him. The only way to survive was to take from others. Stuff they didn't need anyway. I ended up in jail where I had to kill this bitch who tried to whack me. I checked into death row, where this sleek special agent gave me an opportunity, because of my skills with a blade. I could either fry, or work undercover for him in Paradise City. The mission? To locate the boss of some gangster organization. I had one thing to say to him. Where do I sign?
Hey, where's my knife? I'm only killing my way out of death row here. Oh, according to the splash screen, Kovacs is reminding us to upgrade our weapons, so cheers, you cheeky cunt. Angel is the melee character. It's a lot like using guns, except you're not. That's the kind of analysis you're here for, I'm sure. She also has stealth, which I could never see the use of, As a matter of fact, it's downright detrimental to use it, especially this early in the game. You need the experience to stop being fragile, and you get nothing for dodging fights. You need those numbers right now. There are backstab moves, but there are also normal attacks in overall more useful trait trees that do similar, if not greater damage. This is also a game where enemies come in groups, and while I'll get more into combat proper down the line, I'll say this for now. While your RPG stat numbers do matter, they matter far less than numbers. This stage, besides introducing us to Angel, is also a tutorial on hiring and controlling units. Kovacs, name once again spelt wrong, or right, it's unclear, well, he wants us to not only take neighborhoods but fill them with our own criminals. He wants us to stop criminals, but he is basically setting us up to do so by taking their place. I mean, it's fine, I'm sure he knows what he's doing, it only looks short-sighted to people like me. We do get another insight into how Paradise has changed here, this one massively depressing. This neighborhood has a hotel. Unlike before where each business made a bit of cash, now only hotels bring in money. There are other lesser means to get cash, but these are your primary source. But each only has $2,500 spare, and they are then dry. Paradise is dying, guys. No one is coming here, and we're sucking out the last little bits of life in this city. I made a ton of guesses what this money cap meant on the gameplay end. Whether it was to task the player with picking specific neighborhoods to attack in which order to build a reserve of cash. If the limited funds were to create a balancing act between the player hiring temporary help in the form of gangsters versus less immediately helpful but permanent boosts in the form of weapons, armors, and skills from skill trainers. In the end, I can't tell you what the aim of limited funds was. Indeed, if there was one at all. You can loot enemies for peanuts, sell off items you find, defeat alley scum, but even without doing any of that, I ended most stages with thousands to spare even if I was flash with my cash, filling each hood with hired help and decking myself out. The money you have might as well be infinite because there simply isn't enough to meaningfully spend money on anyway. Regardless, you then start the next stage dirt poor. And considering what a drink costs in this town, that's not surprising. It's not even to put pressure on you to move and take these hoods quickly. The funds don't start draining until they're in your hands. So, you know, we could just be shit managers. Once you have a neighborhood, you bribe the mayor, and you can then hire up to 5 units of 4 types, each type having 1 upgrade: gunmen, bouncers, medics, and scouts. Once hired, they'll gradually pop in and just wait about in front of the neighborhood HQ, guarding the boss. And you cannot control them. Well, that isn't entirely true. In place of controlling units, we have the ability to rally gangsters. When you rally gangsters on a neighborhood, your troops in adjacent neighborhoods will then run in along a set path, attacking any enemies they see, even those random scum enemies, until they make their way to the neighborhood boss and attack him. This stage not only introduces the mechanic, but goes on to teach a lesson in its optimal use. The central neighborhood is said to be much tougher, so take over weaker neighborhoods to encircle and overwhelm it with units. This lesson winds up as smoke and mirrors for much of the game due to a mixture of arbitrary objectives, map layout, and lack of challenge. On the overhead management map, an alleyway may appear like it connects 2 neighborhoods, only for you to look and notice a big old locked gate. As also stated, escape from Paradise City past the opening moments is very easy, seemingly scared of putting an actual threat in the player's path. So this lesson feels like it teaches something it then regrets, but luckily you didn't need it anyway. Besides all of this, I do just despise the rally gangster mechanic on its own merits. Taking unit control out of the player's hands doesn't benefit us whatsoever, and the AI is tragically far too stupid for this mechanic to even function satisfactorily. Units will often get separated due to differing starting positions, or get pulled from their group by the aggro of the random enemies littering stages. The routes set in stone are often circuitous or disadvantageous, and it also means there is no strategy to neighborhood takeovers, as you are at the game's behest in all of this. My complaints are somewhat tempered, however tempered they may be by something that makes the game further worse. That for all of my gripes, as said, Escape from Paradise City winds up so easy that Rally Gangster being a mess doesn't much matter anyway. You will likely win in spite of all this. The real frustration is in what this denies the player, a feeling of agency, and that they earn that victory. Win or fail, so what? It wasn't up to your strategy, your skill, what you set out to do. If you win, take it. If you lose, fuck it, spawn in another lot. Guess what? Enemy units don't respawn, so you'll win out eventually. You have the money to spare. And well, once again, the neighborhood boss at the end of all this, he wears the guise of a tougher enemy, he has a higher level, he has more health, he has greater damage, but he always comes alone. And considering he surrenders before his health drains, that health bar he possesses isn't actually as impressive as it looks. Before the finale, I only need to take 3 neighborhoods for this stage, but I went the whole hog and got them all. I wanted to see an absolute flood of my troops, and for this level I wasn't let down or denied that. But it was a waste of time, and will often end up wasting my time. You may be thinking, sure, but what about that precious experience you talked about? Well, each chapter has gated progress. You can only go up so many levels. With each level, you can only gain so many trait points. So those weapons that are level 4 and up, yeah, those are taunting me. Worse still is that stages have exclusive gear, so I'm thinking I'll have to come back on later if I want these things. It's a stupid idea. I do find this capping odd. I mean, if I level up too much, the experience loss from killing lower level foes would create a cap all by itself. But hey, maybe this is so each stage could have a fine-tuned challenge. If there was any challenge to speak of, that might be it. Elsewhere in town is Kovacs' third and final provocateur, Boris Chekhov, one of the most corrupt men in the LAPD, up to his eyeballs in bribes with a network of hustlers, prostitutes, and informants. He was doing well for himself, at least until Kovacs came in with a truckload of blackmail, so Boris is fighting to keep his shady dealings under wraps.
So, there I was. 1 second a big shot at the Bureau. The next, a lousy infiltrator for the NSA. That agent, Jeffrey Kovacs, he is on my hit list for sure. Why don't people mind their own business? Okay, sure. I had some business arrangements on the side. It maybe wasn't entirely by the book. But somebody has to clean up the liberals' mess, right? And bribes? Give me a break. Additional government funding is what I call it.
That was a lot of build-up to just murdering a random civvy. Perhaps you belong here, Boris. And that's free for free. None of the agents know how Kovacs' name is actually spelt. But then I guess that's the sign of a good secret agent. Boris starts with abilities allowing him to reduce his damage to increase his dodge chance, heal allies, and have a henchman. Other characters need a trait for that, I had to buy into it with Porter. Boris is the weakest combatant, but his traits are geared for strategy and unit manipulation, receiving and giving buffs from having henchmen and territory. So he is easily the worst character. I do love his first loading screen though. Yeah, there's Crowbar, he's moonlighting, and he's huge, and at Boris's beck and call. The whole splash screen doesn't tell you who the rat is, it's just going over how screwed Boris is on his own, and ends with Kovacs advising him to drink on the job. Henchmen are followers, never making much difference in my run. They're not terribly effective. Enemies have just as much trouble with them as I do keeping them alive. They're rubber banded, and I'd pay them the most mind the times I did have to retreat, hoping that band would snag before their death. I'd have to be a block or two away before it did. You do actually have some control over them. They are the only unit you can tell where to stand. Seeing as that is the case, you can't really do much with it. The damage output of Henchmen is tied to your charisma stat, so it starts under 1.0, meaning if you want your henchmen to have base efficiency, you have to buy in, and that is at the cost of more helpful stats. Henchmen are persistent stage to stage. If you can keep them alive, while your level growth is capped, theirs is not, which, considering what I've said, is less impressive than you might think. They are statistically weak and handicapped further by charisma. Kovacs also tells us that taking over Shallow Street will give us this neighborhood's power skill, so I defeat the boss and acquire this hood's jutsu. Power skills are skills that cost power. Power is a bar refilling infinitely. They are a varied lot of character neutral abilities from unit spawns to revealing map sections. Which ones you have access to varies stage by stage, and at times abilities need to be gained by taking certain neighborhoods. What's odd is that some power skills may only be triggered in strategy view due to needing manual placement. Units which can be summoned in combat view are just set to come to your current location. This limitation is entirely arbitrary. You can use grenades in combat view and they work the same way as placing units in strategy view. But then again, this entire argument I'm making is arbitrary since all the power skills that are actually useful just happen to wind up being the ones accessible in combat view anyway. An odd quirk of power skills is that triggering them grants experience. Power regenerates not only infinitely, but quickly. So sometimes, I'd just trigger a bunch of them for the experience. Yeah, wasting people's time, that's the ultimate crime, and makes you a better gangster. This stage also introduces something of a recurring element. Say hello to Chuck. He's a potential henchman hire elsewhere, but for this stage, he is a persistent enemy, who will flip between randomly roaming and charging you. He'll run away on low health and most likely escape. Putting damage on fleeing opponents is something the AI struggles with greatly, as well as the player. Not that it matters if he does die, since he'll just come back a short time later no worse for wear. I doubt it, but this might all sound intimidating. But you'll notice his level marker is blue. He is already weaker than Boris is in a one-on-one, and he will always come alone. If one of his attacks lines up with other enemies, that is pure serendipity on his behalf. He's really just a bit of padding. Some stages do this with henchmen, using them as a unique enemy. After the last stage taught us about encircling neighborhoods, this level just drags itself out, having a southern and northern row of neighborhoods that only connect from the east and west. So that lesson we just got taught is already shafted here. So I've explained this whole gameplay loop, and now on chapter 3 of 16, this loop has been repeated 15 times. Some of it was optional, but that's the minority. I'll spend the rest of this video from here on out going over individual level gimmicks while expanding on the subjects I've covered in these opening segments and introducing a couple more, since these topics are omnipresent. This odyssey has only just begun. Boris seems excited.
I ran into this psycho Rocco. A really messed up guy who said he was hooked up with the big shots uptown. Even though he seemed totally out of control, I thought he could be my way into the major leagues. He said that if I helped him out on a little bar round he was taking, that he could introduce me to some big players. I figured it was worth a shot.
My heart sank a little when I realised I was in for an escort mission. It's a good thing we're Angel at the least. I'd have thought we'd have swung back around to Porter, but the developers have seriously different ideas. Let me immediately backtrack to the previous mission, however. There are optional civilian side quests. The payouts quickly stop being worth it. But I took one to keep a guy alive for 2 minutes. He asked this way too casually.
Hey, if you could spare a couple minutes to keep me alive, I'll grant you something nice.
I spared the time, but they didn't spare Crowbar's life. I got him through alive, but, well, he didn't earn it. He just flailed around like a moron. Yeah, thanks. It was a close call. It was just sheer luck that he happened to run near my units and could be protected. So now we have an entire mission keeping Rocco alive while he goes drinking to get him on our side. I'm not too happy about it, but I guess the only way is forwards. As the stage begins, I look on in horror as Rocco charges off and wipes the floor with everyone. Okay, this might be the best escort mission ever. I'm not sure who's escorting who. I can't even keep up with Rocco as he punks everyone who takes a shot at him. He did die once, admittedly, but it took a lot of doing on their behalf, and it's not a feat they're able to repeat. Eventually, Rocco makes it to a certain bar, and then just stops. We haven't won, mind. Our objective wasn't keeping him alive. Our objective is taking over the entire area. Rocco living large and liquored up is just a condition. So I'd say it's time to experiment. This stage is just a southern descent. I mentioned how rallying works, but I need to know something. You can only have one rally going on at once. No multitasking here, that might make you feel excitement or something. My idea was, if I rally hood by hood, maybe I'd eventually be moving a giant death blob. I do realise this would be meaningless overkill. Neighbourhoods are built around the idea they would be attacked by 1, 2, maybe 3 others. I doubt it's a surprise to hear this doesn't work. When I try to move people 2 neighborhoods over, the ones not spawned from the target neighborhood will just head home. So I guess the question is that a problem? On the one hand, no, it's the game functioning as intended. On the other, its function is boring. Gangland had issues, but stages did at least have something of a build-up and a die-down as you amass a death blob and move it about the stage, overwhelming people with numbers and feeling like you've earned it. Keeping that blob alive was at times difficult, but could be rewarding. And once you are further into a stage, all those troops you hired towards the back are now useless. You might ask, what about defense? Fair question, but defense for what? There are roaming enemies, sure, they occasionally chance into neighborhood bosses, but they're set to go after me. I mean, there is a tiny bit more than that. In some stages after a takeover is triggered, a car with 2 or 3 enemies pulls up and attacks. They're usually killed, and are such a non-issue I didn't even spare a thought for why it was happening. In fact, I only realized it was when I was watching back my footage and caught on that this was causing it. This also only happens the first time you take a neighborhood over. On the rare occasion the boss would die while taking an area for me, the boss would just respawn, his units would not, I'd fight him again, and I just started the takeover once more. But they don't attack a second time. A quick save is also created the moment you start the takeover, so if you somehow die, you are only moments away. Does also kind of fuck you over if you start the takeover with bleed. You have 1 quick save per stage. So, I just have to restart now. I complain when stages die down too much. I like it when things ramp up, which I imagine is true of most people. This doesn't necessarily mean things always have to get harder. Ramping up may mean the end of the stage is the apex of difficulty, but can just as easily mean that you have earned a big, crushing victory to end on. This isn't ramp up nor die down. It's a static, boring, flat plane. The same task over and over again, strictly controlled until the stage just ends. Some takeovers are maybe a bit more chaotic than others where multiple adjacent neighborhoods exist, but as mentioned, after that introductory lesson in encircling, it's a rare sight and a rarer necessity. Sorry to kill the joy of an accidentally fun mission. It's no wonder Rocco gave up and hit the bottle, and Angel has gone from brass knuckles to an oversized knife. Had to get it out of pocket, and sadly I'm still not done talking about curves. Level 1 was Porter, 2 was Angel, 3 was Boris. I said I expected Porter again, but, well, we're Angel. So, here's the order. It's far from a big issue, but this does strike me as a poor way to go about things. It leads to the game feeling like it resets a couple of times. If it had kept cycling between the 3, there would be more variety moment to moment, as well as a consistently building power between the 3. This ain't Yakuza 4. This is not building intrigue. But like Yakuza 4, these events are all chronological. Porter's return in Chapter 12 has him reflecting on events in previous stages, so, you know, I love that. Porter just doesn't have anything to really do right now. He could nip off back to Miami to boat it up in the meanwhile. Whether or not Porter is out of port, Angel isn't resting on her laurels. Rocco liked her work, most of which he didn't witness because he was the one doing it, so we have a new assignment. Go and take down Oleg Orrosiev. Kovacs says we should play along and do his bidding, and you know, I'll just let Angel tell the oddly melancholy tale.
Rocco was happy with the work I'd done for him. Said I showed potential. Yeah, like he was the one to tell. He was even more loco than I thought. But I played along, and he gave me a new and more important mission. To wipe out a Russian gang leader he said was messing with him. Oleg Orrosiev was his name. And of course I accepted. This was what Kovacs wanted me to do, and I wasn't gonna go to the joint.
Our objective this time is just to kill Oleg. We don't need to take over neighborhoods, but I'm a fool who wants money and experience. In this stage, I want to talk about a rather unique area though, the Dark Corner. We don't have to go there, but I did. It's set apart from the rest of the game by being a maze of cargo crates. It's filled with enemies, some blocking the path through, others in optional cutaways filled with loot. I am at this point thinking of scum-type enemies, those who belong to no boss, as shitty Ronin. This area is a lot like the game in miniature, a hamster maze version of the larger product. If you're losing a fight, back off, wait for your health to refill, and try again. That's right, you don't need restoratives or skills, your health just returns after a second. It's an odd fit for this type of game, but then most of my gripes have come from a place of every feature feeling out of step and out of place. Before I go into combat, I have to admit this is not a genre I'm massively into. I dislike cooldown styled combat reminiscent of MMOs. So what I am about to say is a less informed opinion, but I'm still confident that this is a bad version of that style. If we want to get nice and reductive, we can say that all combat in games is really just emptying an opponent's bar before your own. Combat becomes interesting in the ways we can keep our own health while taking the enemies. But this is just a waiting game. I put me and my allies against however many enemies, and all that matters from there is the bar. It's not fun to watch battles play out, and while there are ways to influence this bar, it amounts to making yours drain slower or theirs a bit faster. All that matters in a fight is what came before it, getting the units together, upgrading your gear, leveling up, placing stats, and picking traits. All those things are in their own ways dull. Battles are a culmination of these things that are lackluster in their own ways. We can all see I'm using skills in this footage, however, so you can say that I am indeed active during combat. I am pressing buttons and it's draining a focus bar. It is killing enemies faster. But these skills were hardly ever the decision maker in fights. They are far from make or break. They instead feel like I'm asking the game to just hurry up. It makes the enemies dead faster so I can move on to the next lot. It would be like arguing that films are interactive because they can be fast forwarded. When I was first going over stats or looking over traits, I was hardly blown away, but I figured, hey, there's enough here to go for a build. The stat screen is nice enough to tell you what each stat boosts and by how much, and even takes accessory items with stat buffs into account. The numbers being moved are minuscule, mind. It's more fine-tuning than improving. The difference between putting points into precision or body, which boosts either ranged or melee damage alongside other things, over the course of the game, that's maybe taking a 30 damage point hit to 35 points of damage. With most enemies having 500 to 1000 hit points and bosses several times that, you're just shaving seconds off. It's a difference only a speedrunner could love. This sort of granular optimization is far from my cup of tea. I can understand its appeal. Some people like tuning their character to be their most effective, buying new gear and staying on top of the competition. But this isn't really a game that benefits from it, instead feeling like another way the devs are trying to keep you in a really small, dull bound of power. Each character has two weapon types, but the difference is the same for each of them. Higher damaging single shot weapons, or lower damage multiple hit weapons. For Boris and Angel, it's the difference between one-handing or dual wielding. For Porter, it's single shot rifles, or SMGs. The spray and pray skill still works mine, meaning Porter can spray and pray with a bolt action rifle. And occasionally the skill glitches and fires every bullet at once, which is my second favourite Porter thing. Every character has a handful of interesting traits, but I spent most of my time looking at these trait menus, unsure what to pick. I've said this before in multiple videos, but again, this isn't out of a multitude of interesting competing options, but a flood of dull ones. Again, this game is so easy, it's not like I'm searching for a magic bullet to get me over a tricky challenge. All I'm left with is which sounds the most bullshit gimmicky. I do have a compliment. Many traits are double unlocks, giving you an immediate statistical advantage and opening up skills to learn alongside it. There are two kinds of skills, active combat skills like flurry punches or single strong punches, and status effects. Their handling is at least unique, to my experience anyhow. You select a status effect skill, such as bleed, which inflicts bleed, but that doesn't trigger a move, it just cues it as a special effect alongside your next active skill, making the move cost more focus. It isn't exactly deep, but creates an admittedly clunky synergy between status effects and attacks. You can combo, say, bleed with flurry to give multiple chances for it to proc, for instance. Not to mention skills have prerequisite status effects. This is where I mention my first of two truly broken abilities that give me some joy. Deep Cuts causes bleeding enemies to immediately lose half of their health. Any enemy. Bosses have no status effect immunity. Take Oleg here with his thousands of hit points. Doesn't mean shit if they're hit with Deep Cuts, that's gone. Then there are weapon proficiency traits. You start with beginner and can unlock experienced and expert. Besides level requirements, some weapons have proficiency requirements. This is to an extent more checkboxing, but there is a fun trade-off here. There are at times two weapons with the exact same stats, save for a lower level requirement, yet higher proficiency requirement. You're trading off buying a trait with maybe a skill or stat boost to get access to more powerful weapons earlier. In a better system, this would make for an interesting judgment call that could give me some pause. Here, it just doesn't amount to much. Strangely enough, positioning, range, and movement are factors in combat. Bullets are projectiles. If you move, your character has a slower attack cycle. If an enemy obscures what you're targeting, they will take the shot for them. You can shoot through allies, but they will block attacks aimed at you. Melee enemies can be kited, which against melee-oriented boss fights can turn into a jog for me while they get ventilated by my ranged troops. I must say, I used far less than everything I just talked about to navigate the crate maze. In most scraps, you never need to consider much more than spamming to speed things along. If you're dying, just kinda step out of a fight and let your troops handle it while you recover. From there, I take over a couple of neighborhoods, but as I cross over into Night Square, Angel yells that it's a trap, and we must run. And my response is, oh thank God, this is a lot faster. Angel, introduce us to the next stage.
There was definitely something weird with this Oleg dude. I met a guy called Porter in a bar who seemed to know a lot about the city. He said that Oleg had supernatural powers. Yeah, right. And that I needed some special weapons to kill him. Whatever, I thought. But he kept on talking about groups of weird people living in churches who were keeping some special stuff that I needed. I wasn't gonna go back to Oleg empty-handed, so I figured I just might pay the church people a visit.
Okay, so, remember when I said that Paradise City felt characterless, and then that gets dropped on us? Well, what I said is still true. We got vampires in this game, and where there are vampires, there are vampire hunters. Yet, just like that nanotech malarkey, it all feels so strangely incidental. Something that just happens to be there. What does being a vampire mean in gameplay terms? It means they can do this. And a bigger discovery. Porter wasn't away. He just happens to know we can't have two characters to a stage. And he seems to be on top of the vampire situation. From his bar office, we get the following excerpt. "Weird enemies are fought with weird weapons," he said as he emptied the glass of whiskey in front of him. Where? Don't waste that stuff, Porter, it costs thousands. So, Chapter 6 is Chapter 5 again, but we're allowed to finish it this time. Okay, that's a little unfair. There are a couple of caveats. For instance, now we have to sneak to the church several neighborhoods over. There we'll get a weapon capable of felling a vampire. My first attempt at this was a botch job. I at least had the foresight to tell Jack Creed to stay behind. I am then immediately caught. I attempt to flee, thinking I can escape notice. Turns out, I can't. Next time I was caught, but I changed tact. Maybe I can kill them before the capture timer runs out. Figured that'd be fine. It wasn't fine. The timer freaked out, got caught on timeout, reset, just went wild. But with the guards dead, the game did rule in my favor. Even as I am spotted by multiple people, because I killed one, that's fine. I still have 2 secs. Make it 15. But then I have a wild idea. I just call a car and get driven to the church. This works.
Yeah, move!
Stealthy. No one even noticed the near vehicular manslaughter. In a complete reversal from Gangland, we're now the only ones unable to drive. Cars can't damage you, or anyone for that matter, and you have a Powerskills to call in a driver, serving as a way to quickly traverse the map. It's also sneakier than Angel's stealth.
Stupid jerk, that was close!
I like our driver. I also respect that you're not allowed to look at him. The game will stop you. Who is this mysterious figure? I mentioned those post-takeover attackers. They turn up in vehicles. Before I understood what was triggering them, and when I still thought the game had bite, their occasional attacks had me eyeing vehicles with suspicion. The traffic made me wary, which was interesting, until I realized any attacking vehicles would have a highlighter above them. At the church, we're handed a pair of ceremonial daggers from Senior Vampire Hunter X. Oh wait, that's to close the window, never mind. So now we're back to where we were last level, with no more need to sneak. Okay, that's another lie, we're 100 paces or so back. There we go, now we're caught up. I head off to face the Dark Lord Oleg. It went poorly. strength really does come in numbers. So I then went back to taking over neighborhoods. This is one of those situations where encircling kinda works. It's only 2 neighborhoods, but hey, that's some strength in numbers. Oleg is defeated, as most vampires are, by mass gunfire. An aside before I move on, yes, there is a hard difficulty. We're on normal. I replayed some stages on hard. It makes the game much slower, so yes, that's harder, but I'll hard pass on it.
With his final breath, Oleg told me something that made me flip out. He said Rocco has set me up. That Rocco knew that sending me against Oleg without special weapons would be like throwing a kitten to a bunch of hungry pit bulls. So first the psycho son of a bitch used me to protect him at the strip. Then he sent me to Oleg to die. I'd had enough of that game. I'd take out Rocco and his whole clan if I had to.
I'm not going to say that what Rocco did wasn't messed up, but you are overstating our importance when you say we protected him, Angel. It's more like we witnessed him, and even then, barely. But then maybe I just don't want to take on Rocco. He's one of the few people in this city whose might I respect. The story slide is stranger yet. Angel somehow hasn't caught on regarding the whole vampirism deal. When told by Oleg that Rocco wanted Angel to become one of us, she has no idea what he's getting at. Imagine how Oleg must feel dying, felled by a mortal, and hearing that. For a vampire, that's got to be embarrassing. Downright mortifying. Anyway, Kovacs then gives us the go-ahead to kill Rocco. This story is moving a mile a minute, but it feels so slow. I hope I'm getting that much across. Kovacs has given us the okay, but what about Kovacs? This mission does waste our time a bit with superfluous objectives. First, we need to take over 3 neighborhoods. Then it forces us to buy a bomb-proof suit. So that's a 4th if none of the previous had a shop. The way armors work is curious. The trade-off is damage reduction for movement speed. Not slower cooldowns, slower focus regen, slowed attacks. Just moving slower. I mentioned how movement can matter in combat, albeit barely. The trade-off for armor is that it takes longer to get places. Unless you don't mind just constantly taking it on and off. This one doesn't have its stats listed. It's not much guessing, mind, but fuck me, it slows you to a crawl. I will note, however, where movement can matter is in regards to explosives. They are slow. You can outrun them. So in a tragic irony, this bomb suit makes you more susceptible to explosives. But there is a silver lining. Explosives are not only slow, but very, very weak. Okay, 3rd neighborhood down. Oh, shit, he was still bleeding. Alright, you too, big man. The moment you begin a takeover, their immortality fades, which, fuck, that actually might make sense. So yeah, give them a moment to rest, recover, and clot. I've been using Powerskills for a lot of this run. You've no doubt seen more than the 5 units tops that I've been talking about. Well, stage 7 is where I realised I could abuse them, and then just started calling them in for the mildest inconvenience. Powerskills are what really break proceedings in half. Earlier, I was being conservative with them. Due to limited funds and capped progress, I was in a false mindset of scarcity, but there is no need for that with regards to Powerskills. They have quick cooldowns, and power rebuilds quite quickly. Not only that, how much power you have builds with each neighborhood. You'll start the stage able to call in a Robbie and Medic combo, which is already very handy, and your power will likely refill before you move on to the next fight. And you'll end stages struggling to even bottom out the bar. For all my complaints about Rally Gangster, half the time I just run in and call in the Power Skill trio instead. Made up not only of the aforementioned Robbie and Medic,
I'm a trained physician. Let me come through.
but joined by a task force.
I hear you. I'm a trained physician. Let me come through.
Actually, how silly of me talking in singulars. Most fights would end with several Robbies. That's right, these skills are only tied to cooldowns and power. Already having a unit active doesn't matter. They don't even ask for cash. They're doing it out of sheer love of crime. There is an interesting bit of balancing to these units that is never capitalized on to create challenge, at least not much. Robbies and medics, when called in, spawn at the nearest building, which is amazing. He's good to go at a moment's notice. A Robbie can be anywhere. They can be in anyone's closet, citywide, ready to spring out and hit you with a bat. Unlike rally gangsters, Robbie's picking random fights. It's not annoying, it's charming. He's a force of nature, you don't control him. Anyway, task forces, well, they come in by car, so they need road access. In back alleys and neighborhoods off the main road, they are therefore much slower to arrive. In some areas of the map, you either have to line yourself up with them, or go into fights knowing that that safety net is not as close at hand. This also limits their effective time, as these units come in on a timer, typically good for 1 or 2 battles before departing. Nothing much comes of this inherent limitation outside of a tiny pool of areas. I haven't much thought of the way units need to arrive as part of their balancing before. Escape from Paradise City seemingly has considered it, but then has done nothing with it. There are some power skill units that need to be placed in strategy view. Funnily enough, they're all worse than the trio, despite or perhaps because of their more exotic natures, and well, the limited control you have over them. Thieves, assassins,
I will take care of it.
and snipers. I mean, okay, assassins are shit at the best of times. Look at that damage. That was from a successful backstab, and now he's exposed. Each of these units operate like Robbies. They come out of the nearest building where you pointed them to. For direct combat troops, this is useful. It means they quickly muck in. For snipers, it means I either place them far away, where they won't actually aggro or do anything, or I call them in where I want them, which means they'll come in at close range, which ain't great sniping. Thieves, okay, I'll admit, I only tried him once, and he died immediately, but I'm hardly strapped for cash. Some power skills may be far more useful in multiplayer, I'll admit, but I'm going to take them from a single player perspective. Call me unfair, but I didn't need to make a concession like that in Gangland. There are several power skills based around revealing enemy locations in their neighborhoods, but my ability to act on that information is decidedly limited. Seeing as I can't control many units, it's not like I need to form a plan, the game already has one for me. But well, these skills, particularly the idea of using information, brings me to a point about unit composition. This will be my most nitpicky point in the video, but you've indulged me so far, so please indulge the most I've overthought a singular unit. I said in Gangland I went for mass gunfire over everything. The same is true here, and it works very well. In each neighborhood, we get 5 slots with which to place a selection of gunmen, bouncers, medics, and scouts. I'd go with 5 gunmen a majority of the time, occasionally tossing in a medic to very little change in survivability. Fuck scouts. I'm not only going to argue scouts are useless, but are a liability, and the enemy uses them. Scouts are the only unit which roam. All others remain stationary. Scouts are weak in combat, so their role is to spot enemies and retreat back to alert the others. Those stationary units are clustered around the only place in a neighborhood that matters, right outside the neighborhood HQ, guarding the boss. An attacker would need to go through them. Here is a hypothetical. Angel has stealth, but even if she snuck past and then somehow took out the boss in a single blow, you still need no nearby enemies to begin a takeover. She'll immediately be set upon by the units outside, so the stealth approach has been up to this point a minor help at best. But then, even if she goes unnoticed beyond that point and begins the takeover, the boss will leave the room, only to get shot by the units outside who can smell a traitor. Neighborhood bosses are tougher than the average unit, Scum are a unit type, but they are not winning a fight against 5 gunmen. I can say that with confidence. A scout is 1/5 of that potential fighting force gone. Having a scout stops a better unit from existing. A scout's job is to drag units away from the only thing they actually need to defend. And now, if they do get in a fight elsewhere, the neighborhood boss can't end up mucking in. Attacking shops and businesses isn't a factor in this game, so it's not like you can draw defenses away by attacking strategic weak points. The boss is all that matters, and units are placed in a way that keeps him defended. In the campaign mode, enemy neighborhoods aren't under the same 5-unit cap you are, but they squander that by having scouts, who in their attempts to run off and collect units, tend to wind up dividing their own lads, weakening them for me. So again, fuck scouts. Okay, alright, back to the power skills. Last 3 notable ones. If you think what I've talked about so far is boring, just know that these have been the cream of the crop. We got Neighborhood Lockdown. It makes the boss of an area step upstairs for 60 seconds. Might be useful in an attack, therefore useless in single player. When I said it's impossible to control units, that was a lie. It's impossible to meaningfully control them is the truth. The defend location skill lets you move units a la an RTS. The fact this is a power skill with a cooldown which only works in friendly territory limits its use severely. When I first went to type that last sentence, I started it out as, the fact it only works really tells you what the ethos of this game is. I untyped that because besides sounding even more wanky than I usually do, what the fuck is the ethos of all this? Skill number 3 is the ability to call in cars, which I already covered, so I only had 2 more, I guess. Oh, and I found Rocco. Is Rocco a vampire? I don't need anything special to kill him. Is the bomb suit loaded down with Bibles? Forget Oleg, Rocco has a really ignoble death for a vampire, as he is beaten to death in a back alley by a baseball bat, which I doubt has any wood from the true cross in it. This is the death zombies get, not vampires. From here, however, well, Rocco is getting a cremation, and Angel's story is going on the back burner. After Angel killed Rocco, Kovacs gave Boris his next mission. Well, it took him bloody well long enough.
I ran into this badass, Nick Porter, who'd been in a fight with a guy called Lobo. According to Porter, El Lobo is the right-hand man to Santiago Vargas, the overlord of Paradise City. Porter was talking about their clan having supernatural powers, and I thought, yeah, right. I set out to find this Lobo clown.
We have a name! Santiago Vargas. That's our man. And, I guess Porter has been up to more off-screen. I love this art of El Lobo. He's so greasy looking. Oh, I can only imagine what fools Boris and Biggins there are going to feel when they realise they're charging a cardboard cutout. So, back in Boris's shoes. And this may look a fancier part of town, but believe me, it's just as crooked. You got a leak. You're gonna have mold. This stage boils down to 2 fat men shooting each other for minutes at a time. I don't really have a big all-encompassing topic for this stage, so really this is what I've got to appreciate right now. I mean, at least in video form, I was able to get this far before it happened. We're at the halfway mark, stage 8 of 16. Feels like it happens a lot sooner when you're actually playing it. El Lobo comes off as hilariously inept for a lot of reasons. The opening sets him up as a mysterious, powerful, sweat-slicked entity, able to disappear on a whim. Porter couldn't take him down. He charges you non-stop throughout the stage, and yeah, he can vanish, does it all the time. But that's because I killed him. Over, and over, and over, and over, and over, and over, and over again. It's fascinating. Within minutes of the stage, El Lobo goes from, okay, not menacing, but something, to moronic. While you gain levels, he sits still, getting weaker from a position of weakness. He also only comes at you alone. I can have Robbies, medics, anywhere in moments, Lobo. I respect your persistence at the least, but you ain't got it, pal. Also, this has to be said, he isn't a vampire. He's a lich. And territory is his phylactery. We need to take his churches to put him down for good, and these are spread to the far corners of the map. You know, El Lobo, the fact he always comes back not truly killable, it's giving me horrible ideas about what this means for Paradise. Not just now, but back in Gangland times. There were always more criminals, more battles to fight, and families to destroy. Perhaps El Lobo explains why. Paradise City truly corrupts those who enter. And speaking of corruption, this stage features cops. They attack us on sight, and Boris, a copper himself, albeit a bad one, is more than willing to retaliate.
Oh, this neighborhood is off limits. Move on. There's nothing to see here.
I agree. Still, after claiming the churches and giving El Lobo more deaths than most men get, maybe he'll stay down. Boris had killed El Lobo and was enjoying his stay in Paradise City more and more. I like this place, Boris thought. His cell phone rang. It was Kovacs. You've compromised the entire mission, Kovacs shouted. Get out of the city now! He shouted even louder. No way, Agent Man. I'm not going anywhere. I've become very fond of my little city, Boris replied. Well then. There is only one thing I can do, Kovacs replied more silently. Boris almost thought the agent sounded like he was smiling as he smelled his pits.
Kovacs, the eager beaver, who was still in diapers when I was made head of division at the Bureau, had called me up, telling me to abort the mission and get out of the city, saying I was implementing my own agenda and straying from my task when going after El Lobo. Maybe he was right, but by then, I had already had enough of that pipsqueak telling me what to do. So I told him over my dead body, which he seemed to be taking literally.
I can't be entirely sure that the story wasn't penned by a 5-year-old. It's weird, fast-paced yet rambly, and things just kinda happen with tenuous rhyme and much less reason. It jumps from character to character, vampires happen, vampires keep changing their rules, and somehow Boris compromised the mission by expressing a like of the city, and then leaned into it. Maybe it was the cops he killed last mission, actually. The writing is rife with spelling errors, run-on sentences, and the spelling of Kovacs' name flips between two spellings, and this screen has both of them. It's at the very least coherent, but the game is called Escape from Paradise City, and at beyond the halfway mark, not only has no one expressed much desire to leave, Boris is willing to kill for the right to stay. The gimmick this stage is non-stop NSA agents to kill, to really just solidify our betrayal of the mission to kill the crime lord. And speaking of non-stop NSA agents, I guess Kovacs is also a lich? I mean, I've put him down repeatedly, but he keeps coming, spawning right on top of me at times.
Crime, it's the way I fly to you.
Hang on a second, this is a criminal backroom. Are you in cahoots with these men? Did Robbie smuggle you in? I said Kovacs' plan may have had holes in it, and now so does he, as it seems his backup plan in case the criminals he hired turned out to be criminals was to just go and kill them himself. He's at least wise enough to occasionally accidentally line up with the attacking NSA agents. He only remains dead when we've taken over all 9 areas, making this the El Lobo mission but 3 times longer. Throughout all of this, Kovacs is saying things like, "We can't let this rampage pass unhindered. Strike Team Gamma, follow me." Which, backs up my idea this was written by a 4-year-old. I did say 4, right? I kind of adore it. Finally, I take over the whole district. Boris flexes and Kovacs becomes so angry at the sheer amount of crime he disintegrates or something. Fun fact about this menu screen, there is no level select. There's new campaign and load game. It's one of those little things that makes the experience feel a bit cheap, and not in a cheap and cheerful sense. Your method of level select is in the game creating unique saves for each level, jury-rigging a level select out of it, and this creates a glaring problem. If we want to replay level 3, we'll go back to Boris as he was then, at level 1, totally fresh. There is no way to bring your leveled up characters backwards. No way to just go in, have a laugh, curb stomp some poor sods. And that's a replayability issue. You can rightfully say, "Snake, I've listened up to here. I know you'll never replay this game under the best conditions." Well, that's fair. But remember those stage-specific weapons I mentioned? There was a broadsword for Angel in Chapter 4. I wanted that. but it was level capped, so I went without. I didn't think to buy it and hold on to it since I was yet to realise the implications of there being no level select. And in later stages, that broadsword was no longer there. So, if I want that broadsword now, I'd need to go back to that stage and buy it. But not only that, I'd need to then play back up to the point I could use it at all. Fortunately, I had realised this in time for Boris. I spent a few stages carrying dual Desert Eagles and 44 Magnums for when I could eventually use them, in case they weren't available later. Boris hasn't killed enough people to know how to use them yet, so, well, let's get to it. Let's rack up that body count. On to chapter 10.
With Kovacs out of the way, I was free to do whatever I wanted. An appealing thought started to take shape in my mind. If all the powerful people in Paradise City were wiped out, the field would be open for someone to come in and take it over. Someone like me. Porter had spoken about another clown called King Willie, who apparently held court in a nearby part of the city.
Boris, having killed Kovacs, is thinking bigger by, basically just carrying on doing what Kovacs brought him here to do. President Boris sounds good to me, as he sets off to kill King Willie. Hey, I found it! I found a phone book! Someone get Mario on the line. I love this stage opening with Boris questioning Porter's advice. Porter said I needed holy powers to defeat these people. Okay, let's say he's right. Bitch, you killed El Lobo! First, we need to take over a neighborhood with a church. We need an exorcism to kill this vampire because the rules have changed yet again. If you go at King Willie without, he just won't die. No, we can't simply ask the church's manager to call in an exorcism. We need to flex on God. I keep noticing billboards about this city. I have a feeling that at some point these had mock ads on them, but in the final product they flip between ads for other games from the same publisher. I can't imagine the people of Crime City are big on Sherlock Holmes. I doubt they've got computers, period. And well, who the hell puts an advert right in the middle of their product? Needed the time there to nab a church, but when I do, I unlock exorcism. Why do I do this to myself? More than half of those takeovers were unnecessary. I mean, at least it lets the finale hood count as adjacent to 4 others. So, a fun fact about Rally Gangsters, besides the fact it's actually Rally Gangers, but my brain is not accepting the word gangers for this game. As said, they follow a set path. The set path isn't King Willie, it is, as usual, the neighborhood boss. So for objective purposes, Rally Gangster isn't useless, but it is a lot like the loading screen, a jury-rigged solution. King Willie's roaming AI crosses over the neighborhood boss on occasion, and the aggro may catch on to him. At least half of my units wind up fighting King Willie. Alright, enough people are here to see it. Let's do an over-the-phone exorcism. The power skill of Christ compels you.
The Lord cleanses all evil.
And so, another vampire falls. Mostly to gunfire.
It was clear that there was truth in what Porter had said about supernatural powers. If El Lobo was Santiago's minion, I was definitely up against something that needed preparation. It seemed like these creatures' powers were somehow linked to city neighborhoods, and that their supernatural strength could be reduced if these neighborhoods were taken away from them. I decided to head for a part of the city Porter had talked about as being Santiago's control district.
Hang on a second, the power skills are supernatural powers? Is that why we can't look at the driver? Who are they, Karen? I should go after the neighborhood that hold the power skills, Boris thought, and I better have bodyguards close by at all times as I have a feeling bad power skills are coming my way. Very bad power skills. This stage starts as usual, sort of. It tells me to take over the whole area, and well, fuck me, that's huge. So I quit the game and put on a podcast, and then the stage starts as usual. Sort of. It very quickly plays its hand with the game using power skills against you. And this caused something in my brain to start turning, but it wasn't until a long time later that it finally clicked into place. This entire game, I felt a strange disconnect. Like my entire runtime was spent grabbing at smoke, thinking I could grasp something solid. This feeling continued well into my note-taking. With most videos, I take paper notes and digitize them later. I didn't feel like doing that this time around. After the first stage, I put down the pen and decided I'll just dictate my notes. I'll come back, rewatch, and write down what I said later. This made the whole process take a lot longer. Turns out, I'm a lot less selective with my note-taking when I can just voice what's going on. Most of my notes are repetitive, but this gave me time to rewatch the game, to see things I didn't see in the moment, see what I got wrong, what I misunderstood. The thing that was making this video so hard to write was that I kept questioning what all the features wanted to do, what end result it was trying to arrive at. The hours spent transcribing made me realize that I was overthinking things. There may be an intended end result, but it doesn't materialize. Every feature is experimental and half-baked. Limited funds, limited leveling, limited everything, but infinite power skill units. Vampires and liches, but they only have one unique ability. You need to take over churches in a couple of stages. Elsewhere, you're just not allowed to, and in some of them you fight vampires anyway. A strategy view, but no strategy. So many balances and features in this game overshadow or contradict others, and that's assuming they go anywhere, period. And this stage, where on a timer power skills are lobbed at me, and I'm a little blown away. As on the rewatch, I realised the thing I've been missing. In Gangland, never mind, in strategy games, you're fighting an enemy. Alongside possible stage objectives is an active opposition, but this isn't a strategy game. It just looks like one sometimes. I'm using watered down strategy rules and tools alongside watered down RPG rules and tools to fight nothing. It's the illusion of an enemy, cars that spawn after you do a takeover, random non-stop respawning enemies with simplistic AI set to charge you and yours. It's a haunted house version of opposition. This stage isn't even dynamic. The power skills, as I said, are on a timer, triggered intermittently. A facsimile of an opposition that could have existed at any other point, really, but exists in this one stage as a gimmick. I can't deny it livens things up a bit. As we take neighborhoods, we not only cancel enemy power skills, but gain them in turn. Oh, they used neighborhood lockdown. This game is a lot of waiting. Waiting for troops to spawn, health to refill, bosses' health to refill, waiting for the car. I can wait for you, you son of a bitch. This skill is so pointless, it can remove the boss, but it's not like the game can respawn units to put pressure on me while I do wait. And one thing that confuses me for different reasons, I'm so used to these half-busted jank games leaning into being hard, either to drag out the runtime, poor balancing, or maybe good old cruelty. But Escape from Paradise City softballs everything. Everything is too weak to be a threat. And I'm not used to that. Enemies die easily. The random enemy spawns tend to come in small groups. The enemy's capacity to pursue is poor, so you can leave any battle that happens to go bad. I don't get it. I should note before I close the book on this mission that Boris is currently taking on Santiago, the man who Kovacs brought us here to fight. So all Kovacs needed to do to win was nothing.
Who was this woman? There was something unearthly about her, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Her name was Lydia, and she told me that she worked for a very powerful man in the city. She could tell by looking at me that I wasn't what you'd call a regular citizen, and she offered me a tryout job to clear an abandoned church from some nasty street dwellers living there, giving her boss a hard time. Lydia had a magical attraction to her, and I wasn't hard to convince.
Well, I just fucking wonder what's going on, Porter. I fucking wonder. I wonder what's going on, Porter. Oh, hey, we're Porter again. Alright, gotta say I like the splash screen version of events a little bit more since it includes Porter reflecting on how little he cared for Kovacs. And with him dead, maybe he'll just skip town? Is that how this works? Your handler dies and you can just go? No one else at the NSA knows about it? I mean, I guess with Boris and Kovacs' blackmail situation, and the fact that Boris has killed the entire NSA, maybe there is somehow no more oversight. That sucks for Angel. Now she's just a death row convict out in the wild. And I've got to update a point here. In Escape from Paradise City, Porter was just about to casually up and go. The idea didn't even faze him. Also, Porter, the person who has been telling Angel and Boris about the supernatural goings-on, and even told Angel about the people conspiring in churches, is about to go and gun people down in a church at the request of a mysterious woman he just met. "Nice to meet you, sweetheart," said Porter. "If you upgrade your equipment and get some skills on this one, I'll have more jobs for you." "Honey?" "Oh, these two are just such flirts." If you're suspecting mind control, I can't blame you, but I promise, based on future events, that's not what's happening, at least not with Porter. Porter is just being a mug. Alright then, chapter 12 and back to level 3. And hey, Crowbar's alive. And back to level 3. I don't have to take over everywhere. All I need to do is take out the folks in that church. But by now, you should know how I operate. This guy is even called Vampire Hunter. It's not even being treated like a twist that we're the idiots here. And so, the mission ends with Porter gunning down an old man wielding a crossbow in a church, slapping his ass as he dies.
Lydia said her boss was very impressed with how I'd handle things at the church, and took me to see him. His name was Santiago Vargas, and he lived in a huge hotel in the uptown area of the city. We started talking, and he said I could go far by working for him. Suddenly fear came over me, like a curse, worse than I'd ever felt before. Somehow Santiago could sense it. As I reached for my weapon, there was a shift in his eyes, revealing something otherworldly, like centuries of darkness were buried inside him. I made my escape.
Well, the tension is hitting a fever pitch. Lydia is a thrall to Santiago, and now we have to escape. The neighborhood, not Paradise City. "And now I will make you one of us," Santiago said as he bared two fangs the size of beer cans. Such imagery. As we flee, Lydia's will is taken from her. She can only voice her suddenly fully formed love of Porter while her body contorts to kill him under Santiago's control. And so Porter must flee. Crowbar, sadly, doesn't make it. Oh, for fuck's sake, I even stopped to take over a neighborhood on this level. Just go. It's a dramatic set piece. It's the only one they have. There really isn't much to this mission beyond the fact it really is just that. The sole set piece. We flee through some neighborhoods, a car bomb goes off, Lydia turns on us, and we must leave by our lonesome. The first time I played, this didn't actually happen, and I ran down an alleyway that was filled with emplaced enemies ready to meet me. But when the stage did function as intended, I didn't need to go this way at all. So I think at some point this level went on longer. Again, I've grown to expect half-busted games like this not to go easy, but despite all the vampires, this whole affair is rather toothless.
Lydia was torn. Santiago had control of her body like a puppet master, but not of her heart. She called me, telling me to meet her in a different part of the city. But something didn't sit right. The quaver in her voice told me she was about to give up. She wanted the whole ordeal to come to an end.
The loading screen says they spent the night together and Lydia left the next morning, contradicting not only the cutscene, but, well, the previous stage. Besides that, this stage has an honest-to-God enemy. Lydia travels the map taking territory. Or at least she did until her AI snagged on something and then she just kinda stayed in one place. So, Escape from Paradise City does have the means to trigger power skills at me, spawn and respawn units, and have a somewhat dynamic opponent who takes over areas and makes moves against me. If you combine these three elements, you would have an opponent. But instead, it divvies these elements up, using them as single-stage gimmicks. And that is so odd to me, that this game is rationing itself in this way, trying not to be repetitive with its semi-dynamic elements while repeating the same stagnant gameplay loop tens of times over and over again. It could well be they only made one map that had the AI in place to handle Lydia. The Powerskills stuff somehow only worked on another tailor-made map. Besides the multiplayer, which is inaccessible to me, there's no free play mode to really check all of this. Never mind. This doesn't make the game crash. You just can't put bots in here. But in the campaign, all of the elements that could make for a more satisfying overall experience filled with, well, opposition, conflict, and stakes are squandered. Let's talk explosives. They kinda blow. I mean, I mentioned it with Rocco. Grenades are slow and shoddy, doing maybe 150 damage a pop in players' hands. Porter has a trait to double that, which makes them, while not good, not a complete waste of our time. He can wind up comboing a bunch of skills together so that as long as he stays in one place, his grenade cooldown and focus cost halve, and he becomes a pretty slow grenade spam machine. Oh, hello, church manager. I hope one day I'll join you in religious middle management, but not today. But then I did discover my favourite skill, Last Stand. For a measly 75% of your life, you can just Joseph Joestar a motherfucker. It's not quite broken, but that is easily over 1,000 damage if it hits. Well, it's not quite enough to take out Lydia by itself. The mission is just to take down Lydia, but she has the hit points to spare, and she'll start running long before she's at risk of death. Pursuing her and putting the hurt on isn't really in the control scheme, so we need to exhaust her of places to flee. This stage wants to turn her death into a tragedy, but it's a farce. Knowing that Santiago rules her mind, she begs Porter to be the one to free her, trying to turn her own death into a grand romantic gesture. She even goes as far as to, well, bare her heart to us as we shoot her. But, well, I'm sorry about that, Lydia, but you simply have too many hit points, so Porter can't give you that romantic gesture, so instead she winds up on the receiving end of a bullet bukkake.
Poor Lydia, freed from Santiago's powers at last. All it took was someone who cared enough to make it happen, enough to kill her. Too bad it had to be me. Before dying, she told me there were some things I should take from the corpses of the Rat, King Willie, and Oleg Orrosiev. Stuff to help me defeat the old man. Obsessed with avenging Lydia's death, I headed toward the churches where those bodies were.
Alright, penultimate mission, and Lydia, with her dying breath, gives Porter complex instructions to go and nick body parts from former bosses, which are just lying around in churches, kinda stinking up the place, I imagine, and no one bats an eye as Porter goes in and lops a bit off. This stage's gimmick is gun-toting Robbies constantly respawning to fight me. They do minuscule amounts of damage, and would you mind? I'm trying to shop here. I was able to break the habit on this stage, mind. I realized on the last corpse, all I need is the corpse. I didn't need that neighborhood. So fuck it. Maybe I'll be a little underleveled next stage. Who gives a shit? I can take it. I can save the time. Alright, final stage. So, who do we play as? Well, I'll let the 3 new save files speak for themselves.
This one's for you, Lydia.
You messed with the wrong bitch, Santiago.
One last creature to go, and I'm the king of this city.
Oh man, I may have learned I don't need to take over every neighborhood, but then I played this stage as each character, and I took over every neighborhood the first time around. The second and third, you can see my progressively more lackadaisical attitude. Let's look at the slide for this stage. My word, that's a rogues gallery. At least several of whom we met. It was like having reached the top of the stairs only knowing that the last step was higher than you could jump and more slick than oil. This was where Santiago was hiding though, and cost whatever it must, the old vampire had to fall. Goes without saying, those body parts from last stage never come up. So, it's the final stage. Does it pull out all the stops? Cops, enemy power skills, a roaming foe, Santiago himself maybe, taking over territory and threatening yours? Actually, no, none of that. But El Lobo respawns once. I mean, well, good on him, but he's still not very hard. Bye, Lobo. Speaking of, the game is breaking down. A good few enemies for the last few stages have inexplicably been at level 1. They die to a light brush and do single-digit damage. The very first enemy I encountered on the final level had this affliction. I quickly alleviated him of it. And as I learned after taking the entire stage, save for the Imperial Hotel where Santiago resides, which, I don't know, that must have lots of dollars. Guess what? Only one neighborhood leads in. And because of how Rally Gangsters works, Santiago is just plopped down next to the office of the neighborhood boss. And so the great vampire and crime lord falls to mass gunfire. Angel, although underleveled, simply used that ability to half the final boss's health. And Boris, well, his victory wasn't all that interesting really, but it happened. When I beat this game before I knew it had cutscenes, and the game just gave me a congratulations before booting me to the main menu, I was more or less expecting it. It felt like the ending I had earned. But now we have the epilogue. Well, how can you tie a neat little bow on this? Let's hear it.
And so our story ends. Paradise City got cured from its disease, and our three heroes moved on in their lives. Porter returned to his boat in Miami, where he wrote the best-selling novel, Love in Paradise. Angel left for Mexico, where she settled down in a little fishing village by the Pacific Ocean, earning her living by carving small wooden statues. Boris never left Paradise City. He continues to live in the penthouse in the former Imperial Hotel, now called the Presidential. Thanks for playing. Be well and rock on.
I guess the moral of the story is crime pays. Boris got away with it. No one cared. Porter was able to retire from a life of crime with lined pockets. I mean, sure, he lost Lydia, but he didn't enter the city with her, so really that just means he broke even. And Angel, well, I guess that's the best she could have hoped for. I'm not sure I have many more words to put to Escape from Paradise City. Despite how many I have done, I feel a little hypocritical when I say the lesson is not to overthink things. But my reasons are as follows. I was only able to put my thoughts down properly once I stopped grasping at what the intended end result was meant to be, and instead just focused on what they were. And that was a mush. An empty, easy, dull as dishwater mush. Gangland was a strange game. Annoying, repetitive, and hard. But it had charm. And it had cohesion. It used the Mafia as a basis for its look and feel. You extort businesses, lads in newsboy caps moved money back and forth, people come to you to ask favors of the Don, and you trade in vice, bullets, booze, and blackmail. So when I look at the mechanics of Gangland, even the ones that seem half-baked, I know what the intent of its systems is, to place the player in the position of the Don. Escape from Paradise City has no such easily placed style. It's a multi-genre car crash of systems and ideas that form a bizarre grey gruel. I dodged writing a conclusion to Gangland as I felt I had already said everything I had to. A conclusion was superfluous, and somehow this actual conclusion feels weaker than that. This hasn't earned a conclusion. It just hobbled past the finish line after a whole game worth of ideas that lack an end goal. And it's so bad that even the sodding title doesn't mean anything. An escape is dramatic. You flee, you get out, there's explosions behind you and shit. That was just... they left. 2 out of 3 of them left. 1 stayed, and he had the happiest ending. So, thanks to everyone who watched. If you enjoyed this video and want to support creation of further videos like this one, you can support me on Patreon. Get thanked like the people scrolling past now. And at upper tiers, get access to scripts and bonus afterthought videos where I round off any lingering thoughts, questions raised by the video, and questions raised by those in said tier. If you can spread this video around, I would be deeply grateful. YouTube has kinda fucked people. YouTube's kind of fucked me lately on it actually sending people to my videos. And, well, rest in peace, Media Mobsters. And burn Paradise City.